Picture this, it's the 1960s and under the blazing California sun, thousands of Mexican-American farm workers bend over rows of grapevines, earning only pennies for their exhausting labor. Then a quiet but determined leader, Cesar Chavez, steps forward. In 1968, he fasted for 25 days as a form of protest to bring light to the brutal conditions hidden in America's fields. And suddenly, this protest demonstrated how a small community could capture the world's attention. This moment sparked one of the many moments for the Chicano movement, a movement that challenges discrimination and unites a community as a whole to fight for justice for workers. This movement is a revolutionary struggle for labor rights, advocating for better wages and working conditions for Mexican-American farm workers. In response to discrimination, activists like the Community Service Organization pushed for greater political representation for the farm workers, ensuring that the Chicanos could vote for leaders who could protect their rights. The movement's reaction to exploitation led to reforms, such as the Agricultural Labor Relations Act of 1975, which ensured peace on the working fields while providing recognition and justice for laborers. This revolution was not just a political one, but also a part of a significant social movement, through public protests as well as cultural production and advocacy. These were all key elements in asserting its identity to a government that did not deem them equal. Through its efforts, the Chicano movement not only challenged injustice in the field, but also helped to reshape legal protections for minorities in America, extending far beyond the labor movement. What motivated and inspired the Chicano movement? Well, the Chicano movement was heavily influenced by the local labor strikes, university activism, and artistic expressions. An example is the African American Civil Rights Movement, which occurred throughout the 1950s and the 60s. The movement strove to secure equal rights under the United States. The African American Civil Rights Movement paved the way for the Chicano movement to develop, as seen in the emergence of organizations like La Alianza Federal de Pueblos Libres in 1964. They aimed to reclaim land and water rights that were lost to New Mexico War in the Mexican-American War. Both of these movements shared the same goal, to protect their minority groups. The African-American Civil Rights Movement inspired the Latinx to push for equal rights in a non-violent manner, such as boycotts and marches. For example, Cesar Chavez's form of protest was a non-violent yet eye-catching, achieved through organizing marches and boycotts. Some protests utilized cultural productions to help assert identity and demand social changes. One such example explained by Luis in the Plaza Classic podcast interview with Luis Valdez, a key figure in the Chicano movement and the director of La Bamba. Throughout the podcast, Valdez discussed his experiences with other important Chicano leaders such as Richie Valens and Cesar Chavez. This provided a first-hand insight into the movement's history. The overall message effectively illustrates how Valdez leveraged his expertise in theater and film to showcase the struggles of the Chicano community. Through Valdez's movies and productions, he emphasized, as did El Teatro Campesino, that audiences understand workplace injustices in a more direct and emotionally engaging way. He noted that because this visibility helped motivate and allow for other Latinx to move in a collective action, showing that their cultural expression can, in reality, mobilize effectively as traditional organizing via marches, which is shown in the Los Angeles protests organized by Ruiz, showing the fear and suppression of politicians trying to silence. Well, there were many changes, both political and social. What exactly were the reasons it was able to have such a profound cultural impact? Simple, right in the middle of the action with the peak of activism in favor of a greater grasp on political and social agency. Another way the Chicano movement sought to promote greater opportunities was through labor activism. This group employed a systematic approach to expose the exploitation of farm workers, resulting in significant improvements in their working conditions and wages. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, also known as the NFWA, in 1962. They employed non-violent strategies. For example, the Plan for Consumer Boycott letter from Cesar Chavez to Mike Miller in 1965, discussing how going through this boycott against liquor and wine enterprise would be very vulnerable because of one and because of possible economic loss and image damage. Doing this ensures getting more eyes drawn because at the time, alcohol was most bought, and because of the age restrictions not being like the modern day, it was meant there was more people to buy and purchase these beverages. This boycott would also help gather more people and more groups that face harsh discriminations in jobs or in society as a whole. It shows that not only can boycotts help change and reform the government, but they also help bring people together because they are not alone in facing these harsh environments. Thus, the most profound boycott was the Delano grape strike, which pressured farm owners and gathered attention much like the National Park Service. Through these efforts, the National Labor Relations Act helped develop and define more thoroughly to ensure the farm workers' rights to organize, form unions, and engage in collective bargaining with their employers were protected. Not only that, but also specifies the procedures to resolve any labor disputes between farm workers and the agricultural employers. This article primarily discusses the inclusion of provisions to help protect workers from employer retaliation for participating in union activities. It also identifies the responsibilities of employers in recognizing and negotiating with farm worker organizations. The bill also establishes guidelines for creating labor boards or agencies to oversee fair labor practices in agriculture, while addressing enforcement mechanisms and penalties for any violations of farm worker labor rights. The Chicano movement was a necessary revolution because it allowed for systems to be put in place to ensure protection for minority groups. The reform was placing acts and laws to place to provide amendments that ensured life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to ensure equal opportunity. The Chicano movement achieved social change by combining cultural expression, labor activism, and political advocacy. First, leaders like Luis Valdez used theater and film to highlight the struggles of the Chicano community. At the same time, NAC's communities, through protests and visual documentation, such as Raul Ruiz photography, made these issues broadly visible to the broader public. Second, the movement directly improved the lives of farm workers through organized strikes, boycotts, and the efforts of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, showing that nonviolent activism could lead to better wages, safer working conditions, and legal protections. Finally, the push for legislative change reflected in the Agricultural Labor Relations Act demonstrated that grassroots organizing could influence national policy and empower workers to negotiate for their rights. Together, these examples show how the Chicano movement strategically combined culture, labor, and politics to fight systematic injustice, uplift marginalized communities, and leave a lasting impact on American society.